Okay. Well, welcome everybody. I'll be talking about vermicomposting. So if we were seeing each other in person, I would ask if you have done vermicomposting before. But anyway, it's setting up a worm bin. I'm just going to go through this as quickly as we can go, and so that you can ask questions at the end. So, and just so you know, I'm in the horticultural science department at the North Carolina State University, and this is my website. So, vermicomposting is very different from regular composting, and the two should not be combined, okay? They're two separate processes. There's a myth that if your backyard compost bin isn't doing well, you should just add worms, and that is a complete myth. And so don't do it, okay? You'll be wasting your money and killing the worms probably. So vermicomposting, you are using earthworms and microbes that are already there, and they will help turn organic materials into a very valuable soil amendment. And you don't want it to heat up. It's a shallow process. It's totally different from backyard composting or, regular thermophilic composting. All right, so why would you do it? Keep food waste out of the landfills. I'm going to talk about that more in a minute. You can do it indoors or outside, whichever you prefer. It takes up very little space. It doesn't involve much labor at all. And it does this to plants. So these were field trials that we did over 3 different seasons, like, I don't know, fall, spring, fall, in regular fields. And so anyway, this shows 0, 10, and 20% by volume vermicompost. So we made sure that all of the plots, they were randomized plots. They all had equal amounts of nitrogen. So the turnips you're looking at there, when the seeds were planted, it was equal amounts of nitrogen. And so this is what happened. And so a lot happens with vermicompost, and it makes it very valuable. How valuable? This shows in the back of this pickup truck a cubic yard of either compost, or that looks like compost, okay? So if you were to sell that, that would sell for about $30 per cubic yard. But vermicompost can sell for $200 to $1,200 per cubic yard. So, and I told you I would talk a little bit about food scraps. People don't learn this in school, unfortunately, but when you think about all of the waste that your household produces, and then think about institutions and businesses, think about schools and nursing homes and restaurants and businesses that have, cafeterias. There's just a tremendous amount of food waste that is generated. It's not the largest category of waste that is generated, but it is the largest amount going into landfills. And that's because, like, paper cans and bottles, they can be recycled. And so their numbers are lower than food waste. Food waste is the number one thing going into the landfill, which is very unfortunate because those other materials sit in the landfill and don't really harm anything. But food waste will slowly degrade in that airless environment, and that creates methane. And methane is about 34 times more potent than carbon dioxide. So it makes landfills the number 3 source of human emissions of methane that is fueling climate change. So it's imperative that people keep food waste out of landfills and not put it down the sink. And so you can easily vermicompost. This is all you need. These are the basic things you need to know about earthworms, okay? So first of all, it's a cold-blooded animal. We're warm-blooded. So today when it got colder outside, if we went outside, we shivered, and that helped us to heat our bodies up. And when it's really hot outside, we sweat, and that helps to cool us down. And the worms can't do that. So they're at the mercy of whatever the ambient temperature is. And just like us, they only tolerate certain ranges of temperatures. And so it's really important to make sure that you are aware of that and look after them in terms of temperature. They're hermaphrodites, and so it means that each worm has what it takes to reproduce with another worm, okay? It takes two to tangle, but when the two worms get together, they both crawl away pregnant, all right? So they don't have lungs, so they breathe through their skin, and their skin has to stay moist. Otherwise, they will die. And they are very sensitive to light, even though they don't have eyes. They have sensors, and light can cause them to be paralyzed in just under an hour. Okay, so out of all of those, so there are about 9,000 earthworm species throughout the world. And I'm only talking earthworms here, okay? I'm not talking about those gross body worms that you've seen on the Discovery Channel. I'm not talking about marine worms. All of these are earthworms. But this slide might blow your mind a little bit, because I'm going to explain that out of those 9,000 species of earthworms, scientists have divided them into 3 different groups according to where they live and what they eat. So the anisic earthworms are probably what we're most familiar with. And those are the big fat night crawlers. They make vertical burrows in the soil, and they eat soil, and then sometimes they come up and they will grab some leaf litter and take it back into the burrow. Then you have endogeic earthworms. As you can see, they live in the soil in horizontal burrows, and they eat soil. They just eat soil, okay? So these first 2 groups do what you would expect an earthworm to do, right? But there are epigeic earthworms. And look closely at the slide. You don't see anything about soil, do you? So they're living on the surface of the earth. I put a picture of a pile of leaves. You would find them at the bottom of the pile, because at the bottom it's going to be moist and dark, and there's all this rich organic decaying material. And so they love that. And then I showed a cow patty, because that's cow manure that's just really, full of nutrients, and it's all decomposing, and earthworms just love that, okay? So they're eating litter, which would be like leaf litter, and manure and decaying organics. So again, they're earthworms, but they don't live underground. All right, so out of the 9,000 species, only 7 species have been identified that are suitable for vermicomposting. And out of those 7 species, there's really one that really works the best for vermicomposting. People around the world love to use Eisenia fetida, okay? That's the scientific name. When you use a scientific name, then everybody knows what you're talking about. But you might call it a red wiggler, and your friend might call it a tiger worm, and another might call it a red worm. Another might call it a brandling worm. And so the four of you might think that you're discussing different types of worms, but you're all talking about Eisenia fetida. Those are all common names for Eisenia fetida. But anyhow, it adapts really well to living in a bin, because you're taking this wild animal and you're trying to culture it. You're putting it in a bin and hoping it will stay there. And they also tolerate a wide range of environmental conditions. And we're going to talk about those. Where do you get Eisenia fetida? You really need to start with a pound, okay? So in a pound, there are about 1,000 of these worms. They're skinnier and shorter than night crawlers, although they are used by people who fish, because red wiggler, they wiggle around and that attracts fish. So some people will use them, but it takes about 1,000 to make a pound, and that's definitely the starting point for getting into vermicomposting. So you don't want to get it from your yard, don't, just because you find some worms underneath a pile of leaves. There's no way to tell that, for you to tell that it's a Eisenia fetida, and there certainly are not going to be 1,000 under there. So, and if you went to a bait shop, look at this picture and the info I have underneath, you would get these cups, these styrofoam cups that can't be recycled. They would have to just go to the landfill, and you would need at least 36 of them to get 1,000 worms. So that would cost you over $120. All right. Whereas you can buy them from a worm grower, and the prices have gone up. I had to modify this slide before I came on because there was a shortage of earthworms last year. Just like, we ran out of we got short on toilet paper, we got very short on worms. So anyway, the price is higher. If you can find it for below $50 a pound, that's great. But you want it from a reputable grower. And we're really lucky that here in the Triangle, we have New Soil Vermiculture. They're in North Durham, and they sell worms and accessories at the farmers markets. But you can also, they've got a great website, and you can get worms from New Soil Vermiculture in Durham. And then in Raleigh, Red Hen Enterprises has worms. Not always, but they have a website too. Okay, so what do Eisenia fetida need? And remember, they tolerate a wider range of conditions than most other earthworms. So they prefer a temperature between 60 and 80. Does that sound familiar? That's what I prefer. It gets below 60 or above 80, and I start getting less comfortable. And they do too. And so they tolerate at least 32 to 95. I've had them tolerate 10 degrees Fahrenheit to 100 degrees Fahrenheit. But the farther they get away from that sweet spot of 60 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit, the more they slow down. So they're going to eat less, they're going to reproduce less. And, so it's nice if you can keep them comfortable, but at that range, but it's not necessary. Okay. Moisture is super important. Remember, I said they breathe through their skin, and their skin has to stay moist. So you want 80% moisture in the top of your bin. You don't want it all the way through, because that would just get too moist and mushy. But, the top 4 inches or so of your bedding, you want to be 80% moisture. They need oxygen, of course, because they're animals, and all animals and living beings need oxygen, but you don't have to go crazy with providing oxygen for them, because the more holes you have in the bin to let in oxygen, the more opportunities for moisture to escape. So you want to always keep that in mind. They tolerate a wider range of pH than most other earthworms. So they prefer neutral, 7.0, but they will tolerate above 5 and less than 9. And then they are sensitive to ammonia and salt. And so do not, manure that's high in ammonia would be chicken litter. So you don't want to put chicken litter into a worm bin. It could kill the worms. All right. So step one is to build or buy a worm bin. Okay. So there's so many different ways, and you can look around on the internet and see what's there, but I'm giving you some examples. We'll start in the lower left. Those are, the one on the left is the worm factory. The one on the right of these two black bins is can of worms. And both of them are excellent. They make it really easy to harvest, but they cost around $100. That's kind of a lot, especially if you're just getting into this, So right above them, the two blue bins you see, they would cost around, $5 to $10. They're just plastic containers that you get at a big box store, and then you're going to add holes. So, and then on the right upper photo is a shipping crate that somebody just, cut in half, turned it into a worm bin. And then the lower right is at schools in California, where they're taking all of their dining food waste and feeding it to worms, not in a single bin like that. There are other ones, but those are culvert pipes. So, the really big pipes that are used to carry water and such, underground, you can cut those and turn them into bins for worms. So where to put your worm bin? I mean, you can put it on your balcony of your apartment or a shady spot outdoors. Some people will put it in their living room and make a really nice coffee table out of a worm bin. I've kept it in my bathroom. This is a picture of my first worm bin in my office, and that one went home with me later, several months later, and that went to my bathroom that had the same kind of setup, where you've got a flat counter and then you've got this nice open space with drawers on either side, and it's like, yeah, great place for a worm bin. So some people put it in their kitchen or their bathroom or their laundry room, basement or garage if you have it, or closet, all sorts of places. But you need to add bedding to your worm bin, because all of these worm bins I've shown you, they're not moist, are they? And the worms need moisture to breathe. So I'm giving you 6 different options for bedding. Choose one, choose more than one. It's up to you what you want to do, but just one of these is fine. So anyway, we've got shredded paper, we've got leaves, we've got coconut coir, cardboard, compost, and then newspaper, shredded newspaper. So those are all options. And what you would want to do is, like in the photos on the right, it shows that I have torn up newspaper. And so, but look how straight those lines are. I did not cut them. I just shredded them, using my hands. And it's very easy to do. But you put them right into a bucket of water and let it soak for 10 minutes. So it really absorbs that water. And then you rinse, and then you just squeeze out the excess water. And then you pull it apart, like you can see the bottom right picture, where I'm putting it into the worm bin and I'm filling it halfway full. Okay, and then when you get your worms, these, I actually got these from New Soil Vermiculture, and they came in a bag and a box, okay, like a big Chinese takeout box. So I removed the bag from the box, And then I very gently emptied the bag into the worm bin. And then you just kind of stand back because the worms will move away from the light and they'll go under the newspaper there, the shredded newspaper. All right, so the next step, after the worms have settled in, sometimes this has not happened to me, by the way, but it's happened to plenty of people where the worms decide, I really don't like it here. You know, they're just kind of shocked that you put them in this new environment. And so sometimes they'll try to leave. And so if that happens, you would want them to have, you would want the bin with the lid on, but in a space that is has a light for 24 hours. You're not shining the light right on the bin, okay? Because that would make the bin heat up and toast the worms. But you just want it to be a lighted space for 24 hours, maybe for even a few days. Just see what happens after you put the worms in there. But I can guarantee they are not hungry when they arrive, okay? Because they've been jostled about and now you're putting them into a new environment with totally different bedding. They need some time to adjust. So you're gonna, you know, maybe wait till the next day, all right? I always like to have a 3-prong garden tool. You can see what that looks like. You know, the bottom picture, that's a plastic one. The one in the photo on the right, you can see that's a metal one. But it's really handy instead of, you know, putting your fingers in the worm bin and pawing around, you can just use this 3-prong tool. So you pull back some bedding and then you empty a small amount of food in there. And then you cover the bedding. How important do you think it is to cover it? I've put this twice in red, bold font that you cover the bedding, okay? Because if you cover the food, I'm sorry, with the bedding. So I'm going to take that tool, I'm going to cover it, and I'm going to be really OCD about it. This is the only time you have to be OCD with a worm bin, but you should not be able to see any food after you cover it. If any food is uncovered, then fruit flies will appear. And once you get 2 fruit flies, very quickly you can get 100 fruit flies. And that's no fun. So you really want to cover that food. And you want to wait until the food is gone before adding more. So when you open up the bin, it should look like on the left, you know, not on the right. On the right, you may as well have a neon sign that says, come and get it, fruit flies, gnats, and annoying flying insects, okay? It's just too much. So just, you know, keep it like it is on the left. So these are some of the types of kitchen scraps. Different types of vegetables work really well. Many different types of fruits, coffee grounds, tea leaves, bread, pasta. I've got 2 pictures of melons there because they love melons. All right. These are things to avoid putting in the worm bin. So don't put meat, grease, bones, or dairy products in there. If you do, they'll stink and they'll attract carnivorous animals like rats. So keep that out of there. You don't want to put cat or dog feces because, you know, that's got pathogens. And then citrus fruits and rinds, do not put them into a small worm bin like what I'm describing. I'm describing a household bin. If you're doing it on a larger scale, it's not a problem, but it is a problem in these small household bins. And I already mentioned that salt, very salty food is a problem. And if you put sugary foods, you know, like say you've got stale Lucky Charms, it could attract ants. So it's not like it's going to harm the worms, but you really don't want a trail of ants heading to your worm bin. And also the worms may avoid vegetables processed with vinegar, you know, like kimchi. or hot peppers, onions, and garlic. So collecting the food scraps. So hardly anybody will just, I mean, if your worm bin was super handy, I guess, I don't know. It's just better to collect the food scraps on the side. So some people will buy a container or reuse a container and they'll keep it on their counter or under their sink. But I like to keep it in my freezer because you'll notice the buy a container and reuse a container, you have to keep a lid on it because that food is going to decompose and get stinky, which you won't smell if it has a lid. But if it's in your freezer, then it just freezes, and there's no odor, there's no decomposition. It's not a problem. So I always keep it in my freezer. All right. So as the worms are consuming food, you'll notice that your worm bin has this fine soil-like material that's accumulating on the bottom. And so after 4 to 6 months, there might be enough on the bottom that you say, I think it's time to harvest this wonderful, useful soil amendment. Okay. And so I'm going to give you 3 different ways to harvest. The first is called light separation. And so you would either go outside and use a tarp or an old shower curtain or something, and or it could be inside under a strong light. But the whole thing is you take the worm bin and you just empty it up, kind of take it and turn it upside down onto that sheet. And the one on the left shows that somebody made it into separate little piles. I usually just, dump the whole thing out into one pile. And then I take my empty worm bin and I add bedding. I fill half the worm bin once again with this moist bedding. Okay. And then any worms you find will go back into the worm bin, and any of this soil-like vermicompost material you would put into a container labeled black gold. Okay. So that's light separation. That usually takes me 60 to 90 minutes to do that by myself. It's a fun thing to do with kids or grandkids. The other way, this takes a lot longer, but you don't have to handle worms at all. Okay. So it's called sideways separation. So this shows another worm bin that I had. And you can see that on the left, you see that dark vermicompost, right? And so, but it's got worms in it. And so you want to lure the worms away. So this whole bin was covered with bedding. All right. But you want to do this sideways separation. And so you're going to move the bedding all to the one half of the bin. So you can see that picture shows you that, right? And so the left-hand side, that's going to, lose its moisture, and there's going to be light, and then you're only going to be feeding the side with the shredded paper that's moist, and the worms will go over there. They're not like cats and dogs. It won't be like, whoa, that's where the food is now. They take their time. So it could take 3 weeks or so for them to move sideways into that paper area. But you'll be able to keep an eye on this other area and notice that the worms are disappearing. And then after that happens, then you can remove that vermicompost. And then you put bedding and move the bedding that's on the right side over onto the left side, and then start only feeding there, and the worms will move over, and then you'll have the castings, the vermicompost exposed, and you can harvest that after most of the earthworms have left. The other is vertical separation. So remember early on, I showed you some bins that I told you were $100. This is a can of worms on the right. The one on the left, that cost me $10 because I bought 2 plastic bins that only cost $5 each, and I turned them into worm bins. And so the whole thing is that you start with the lower container and you only use that, kind of ignore the picture. I don't like how can of worms did that picture, but anyway, the point is you start on the bottom container, do everything I just told you, and then after the castings, the vermicompost has, accumulated, then you start feeding the chamber above and ignore the chamber below. And most of the worms will move, well, within a few weeks, the worms will have moved into that upper chamber, okay? And so then you can harvest the vermicompost from the lower part. All right, so once you've got this wonderful vermicompost that you just harvested, and you're going to want to use it on your plants, okay? You're going to want to incorporate it into soil so you can have wonderful results with your plants. So there have been thousands of academic studies done on the effects of vermicompost on plants. And they found that increased rates, it's like you plant a seed and it will germinate more quickly with vermicompost. It'll grow bigger, stronger, and then have increased yields of whatever that plant produces, whether it's flowers, vegetables, fruits. The roots will be much more well developed, as you saw in my turnip photo, and be able to tolerate stress a lot more. So, and especially like if you were transplanting it, then it's got these stronger roots. But another really cool thing, so not only about the effects of the growth of the plant, but it also, that plant will repel diseases and insects. So isn't that cool? Lots and lots of studies about that. You can look it up in Google Scholar. Okay, so applying the vermicompost. So established plants, you could add 2 tablespoons per quart potting mix around the base of the plant and water it in. You could repeat that every 2 to 4 weeks if you want. Seedling establishment, 1 part vermicompost with 4 parts potting media. So that'll give you 20% by volume vermicompost. And then transplants, small containers, add 1/2 cup to the whole prior to planting. And larger plants, shrubs and trees, 1 to 2 cups prior to planting. And then lawn and turf that's already established, you could add 7 pounds per 100 square feet. Or if it's new, then 10 pounds per 100 square feet. I will warn you that you will be amazed by your vermicompost, and you will just feel like you are giving a gift to your plants by using vermicompost. But I want to warn you not to overdo it. Okay. 20% by volume is really about how much you want to do. And if you add too much vermicompost, then it could have negative effects on the plants. Okay, so I have lots and lots of resources. I've been at NC State for 29 years, and I've got more recently, I have videos and podcasts, and 29 years ago, that wasn't a reality. So I have lots of publications. So that's my website. If you go to, you'll click on vermicomposting and you'll see a lot of choices, okay? And so one choice is households, and that's you. you want to do household vermicomposting. So you click on that, there's information, and then you'll come to my publications and you'll see worms can recycle your garbage. And actually, when you first click on it, you'll see my very popular video on vermicomposting. And, you know, it's only like 4 minutes or so, which is ideal. You don't want it too long, but you can see how to, you know, set up a worm bin, similar to the slides you just viewed. Raising earthworms successfully, that's under, you would click on for businesses, farms, municipalities, and institutions. I have a 4-H vermicomposting curriculum for anybody who's a teacher. And then childcare center, gardens, a lot of gardens at schools and childcare centers. So I have a publication on vermicomposting for that. I also have a book. Okay, so if you're already established with vermicomposting, or you think you want to, you know, you're really interested, and you saw dollar signs when I said it, you could sell it for up to $1,200 per cubic yard, you may want to get my book. Okay, and this is available from any bookseller, including Amazon. But anyhow, you know, people in 118 countries have contacted me about vermicomposting. So it's being done all over the world. And in the last chapter in my book, I really highlight, go into detail about different vermicomposting operations around the world. And then, you know, I talk about how the vermicompost benefits soil and plants, and then just a number of things that you can see here. This is not the order of the book, but it just gives you an idea of the all the topics that I cover in it, you know, so lots of great information. So I'm going to end it there so you guys can ask questions, but there's my contact information again and my website, and I'm going to escape and we'll get rid of this so we can communicate.
Thank you. If anyone has questions, feel free to unmute yourself or throw your questions in the chat and I'll read them out loud. For those of you that are new to Teams, you'll find a microphone icon. It should be either at the bottom of your screen or towards the top of your screen, depending on how you're utilizing it. And you can click that, unmute yourself, and ask your questions out loud. One question I know I had was with the bedding, and you had shown that you had done it with newspaper and soaked it for 10 minutes. Is that the case? You're going to soak any of your bedding types for 10 minutes prior to putting them in, or is that just for the paper?
It's especially for the paper. For cardboard, I would do that longer, you know. I mean, what it is paper, like if you dip paper into a bucket of water and pull it out, you're going to go, hey, it's wet, you know, it's dripping. But there are so many fibers that you really need the water to absorb into the fibers and stay there. And so that's why 10 minutes for shredded office paper and for shredded newspaper. But cardboard, that would be, you know, longer. So, and then, you know, it depends with compost. Coconut coir, which I really don't recommend, because think about the carbon footprint of that, you know. We don't grow coconuts in the United States. But, you know, for that, you can tell when, you know, that you've soaked it long enough. And the whole point is because, you know, I'm trying to make this really easy for you. And so there's not a lot of work. And so, like, sometimes on the internet, people will say, oh, you know, every time you feed, you need to add bedding. Well, no, that's too much work, you know, and it's unnecessary. So if you soak the paper and it absorbs it, And you really should not need to add water. But if you do eventually, you know, if it starts to dry out a little bit, only use a plant mister. Never pour water into your worm bin. Did Carrie have a question? Looked like it, but maybe not.
So if you have a worm compost bin that is outside and you find that you get too much moisture into it, what can you do to help, like, dry it out, for a lack of a better term?
Okay, well, if it's outside, it should not be getting moisture coming into it because you've got a snug fitting lid. Okay, so that shouldn't be a problem.
Yeah. And then with the worms, like, do you run into issues with them reproducing quickly or overproducing to where they just, like, there's too many worms for the bin you've got them situated in? Is that an issue that comes up with them?
It does. When I first started vermicomposting and just in these small bins, yes, they would keep reproducing, and you know, it would get to the point where you can just feel like it's a little crowded for them. And so you can always start another bin, or you know, contact Julia. I'm sure, you know, you guys might want bins or worms. Teachers want worms. Your neighbors are going to covet your worms. All sorts of educators, you know, want worms. And they make great Christmas gifts too. But yeah, in larger systems, they just kind of, their reproduction adjusts to the size of the bin. So they don't really get too overcrowded.
Okay. So you do find that more often with, like, the smaller bins versus, like, a medium or large bin.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, it's definitely something we're interested in exploring for our center, and we also have a box turtle that loves earthworms.
Oh wow.
That's his candy. Every time he gets, that's the first thing he'll eat. So.
Oh, that's interesting. Wow. But yeah, it would be great if you guys would have that, you know.
Yeah, no, it's definitely something worth exploring. I didn't realize how simple and easy it was to even just get started with one. I definitely thought it was a lot more of an intensive process to just get it started, get it going. So I definitely appreciated all the tips.
Well, I've been teaching this for 29 years, and so I've made it so that it's really simple. You know, I do that with backyard composting too. I give presentations on that too. And so everything I teach you, it's inexpensive and simple.
Always a good thing.
Yeah.
It appears someone is typing a question, but saying thank you so much. It was great information. And then I'm a teacher and have a worm bin. We love it. Thank you for your time.
Oh, good. Wonderful. That's awesome.
This has definitely been super helpful, super interesting. One other question I have, being that I have an education center, we're probably going to do something eventually a little bit bigger than just a little tub. If we have more of a permanent outdoors bin, what would you recommend doing in winter months when it can potentially get below 32? I mean, granted, these last couple of years haven't really gotten that cold, but
yeah, right. Yeah, thank goodness. But anyway, yeah, there are all sorts of ways to insulate the bin, you know, and so you know, because like I have a compost learning lab and it's not heated or cooled, and so so I have like that thick pink insulation rigid board that I put around the worm bins.
Okay.
Since you're interested in a larger bin, Julia, you might want to stop by the Interfaith Food Shuttle right at, you know, you go down Avent Ferry past Lake Johnson and it ends at Tryon. You turn left and the very first right is Interfaith Food Shuttle Farm.
Gotcha.
And they have a beautiful outdoor worm bin. They did a
okay.
really
I'll definitely have to swing by there and check that out.
It'd be nice to just go see it, you know?
Yeah.
Take a look.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I didn't realize they had that, and that's, right up the street from us.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
but this, like I said, this has been great. It's been super informative. It's definitely something I'm gonna be going back to the office with and be like, we're gonna start this.
Good.
Like I said, it's one of those things that I've been wanting to do, but I thought there was so much more involved with it that I'm just like, I don't want to take this on yet. Like, we've got a lot going on. But it sounds super simple. Definitely no shortage of paper to shred.
Right. There you go. Yeah. Yes.
Well, it doesn't seem like anybody else has any questions. I want to say thank you again for joining us. Thank you
You're
for those of
welcome.
you that were able to join us tonight. I will be sending out a follow-up email with an EE form for anyone that needs credit. And thank you again. It's been great. I've definitely learned a ton, and I appreciate you taking the time to join us.
Sure. All right. It was fun. Everybody